At the will reading, the sound that struck hardest wasn't the attorney's voice. It was the laughter, bright, delighted, echoing too loudly in that quiet Albuquerque conference room, as my parents handed my older sister a check that could have bought 3 houses on our block. Then a single dollar slid toward me, crisp, flat, almost theatrical in how little it meant. My father, Gregory Solis, didn't blink. "Go earn your own, Mara," and quoted. My mother, Elise, smirked, as if she had waited years to say the next part. Some children simply don't measure up. No one disagreed. Not even my sister. Selena, 35, flawless, the family's lifelong prodigy, accepted her inheritance with practiced grace. She didn't look at me, not once. I kept my hand resting on the polished table as the attorney cleared his throat, hesitating over a sealed envelope addressed only to me. My grandfather's handwriting. And suddenly my mother's smile faltered. I used to believe silence was just what happened when people left a room. But growing up, I learned silence could sit beside you, settle into your chair, even answer questions meant for you. Every dinner table carried it, hands passing dishes across my reach, as if placing food directly in front of me would acknowledge I existed. By 8, I knew invisibility wasn't magic. It was training. It was the choice people made when they preferred someone else's shine. One cold November afternoon, sunlight cut through our Santa Fe living room the same way it sliced across that will reading table years later. My mother was arranging trophies on the mantel, 7 of them, polishing each brass plate with the sleeve of her cardigan. Debate cups, piano competition plaques, leadership awards. All of them belonged to Selena. My own ribbon from the county science fair rested on the corner of a side table, a narrow blue strip I'd been quietly proud of. No frame, no place of honor. By evening, it was gone. "Focus on real achievements," my father said when I asked. He didn't look at me. He was already listing the careers Selena could pursue: law, politics, something worthy of her potential. He spoke to me differently, not as a daughter, but as a shadow. Someone steady enough to clean the yard, walk the dog, run forgotten errands, fill whatever gap no one else wanted to see. "You're dependable, Mara," he told me once, like the word were a participation ribbon. The only person who didn't talk to me that way was my grandfather, Vincent. His voice carried a quiet patience, allowing me time to decide whether his questions deserved answers. On weekends he took me to his adobe lake house north of Taos, where the scent of aged cedar mixed with the soft thrum of water against the dock. He kept 2 fishing rods hanging by the window, one new, one older, carved by hand with his initials. He always handed me the carved one, as if he believed I knew how to hold something that mattered. "People pay attention to the wrong things," my grandfather used to tell me. "They stare at the surface, the shine, the noise, the show. They never look for the pull underneath." Those afternoons with him were the only time I ever felt truly seen. We'd sit on the dock with our lines in the water, letting the New Mexico wind ripple the reflections across the lake. Vincent never asked why I was so quiet. He already understood, the way some people do when silence has shaped them too. Once, he nodded toward a scrub jay perched on the wooden railing, its feathers tousled by the cold breeze sweeping off the water. "Watch long enough," he said, "and you'll notice what everyone else misses." I didn't know it then, but he was giving me a skill my family never valued, the ability to read between actions, to track truth in the smallest shifts of tone and gesture. One winter break, when Selena won yet another award, a statewide debate trophy. This time, my parents hosted a celebratory dinner in our Santa Fe home. Friends crowded the house with bright chatter and expensive fragrances. I spent most of the evening in the hallway, silently carrying guests' coats to the back room. As I walked past the dining table, I heard my mother laugh softly, the same practiced sound she used at the will reading all those years later. "Mara's fine," she told a guest. "She doesn't need much." That sentence stayed with me longer than any argument ever had. It wasn't said with cruelty. It was said with certainty. My parents genuinely believed I needed nothing, so they gave me nothing. In their world, needing little meant deserving less. They had built an entire story about who I was, and never bothered to check if it was true. The next morning I returned to my grandfather's lake house without calling first. Vincent was already on the dock sorting through tackle boxes, breath fogging in the winter air. When he saw me, He didn't ask why I'd come early. He simply handed me the carved fishing rod and waited until I sat beside him. The water was still, the air sharp and honest. It felt like truth in a way my own home never managed to be. That was the day I learned my place in the Solis family, and the day I understood that one day, I would have to choose whether to stay in it. The morning after the will reading, the lake house felt wrong. Too bright, too loud. My parents moved through Vincent's space like inspectors, opening drawers, lifting picture frames, discussing numbers as if grief could be categorized and deducted. I stood near the window, watching frost melt along the deck railing, trying to quiet the echo of their laughter from the day before. Selena drifted into the room holding a mug of coffee she didn't drink. She hovered beside me, the way she used to when we were children, close enough to pretend intimacy, but far enough to avoid responsibility. "It was a shock for all of us," she murmured, her eyes focused not on me but on her reflection in the glass. "Not me. Us." Even in comfort, she centered herself. She always had. My father entered next, carrying a stack of dusty folders pulled from Vincent's office. He set them on the dining table with the casual authority of a man who'd always assumed he would inherit everything. Gregory flipped through the pages, not reading, just confirming they existed under his control. "We'll sort this," he said, meaning he and my mother would. His gaze skimmed past me with the same indifference someone gives a hallway lamp present, but irrelevant. "Your sister will handle most of the responsibilities," he added, already turning back to the folders. My mother, Elise, followed behind him, her hands quick and confident as she sorted envelopes into piles. She hummed a tune I didn't recognize, something light, cheerful, entirely wrong for the room. Then she reached the small stack left for me. The crisp $1 bill, the sealed envelope, and a single brass key. She paused not long, but long enough for the silence to thicken around us. Without looking up, she spoke the sentence that settled everything into place. "Go earn your own." No heat, no hesitation, just a verdict handed down from someone who believed it was a kindness to keep things simple. Selena shifted her weight, discomfort flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. My father pretended to reread a document. The only sound in the room was the soft groan of the dock outside, settling into cold water. I didn't speak. Instead, my fingers closed around the sealed envelope, its weight suddenly pulling heavier than the piles of property and assets my parents had already claimed as theirs. For the first time, I realized they weren't overlooking me. They were erasing me, and they expected my silence to help them finish the job. I left the Solis Lake house before anyone noticed. No door slam, no dramatic exit, just the soft click of the latch behind me. The winter air outside had a thin, cutting edge that steadied my breath as I crossed the gravel path to my car. I set the sealed envelope on the passenger seat and drove toward town, the pine trees streaking past in long, muted lines. Every mile loosened the grip of their voices, the laughter from the will reading fading into static. Near the ridge, I pulled into a small inn, a place my grandfather and I used to stop for hot chocolate after long days on the lake. Rosa, the inn's owner, recognized my last name but didn't pry. She simply handed me a key and nodded toward a quiet corner room. It felt like a gift. 4 walls that didn't expect anything from me. Inside, I placed the envelope on the desk, hesitated, then opened it. A key. A short letter in Vincent's familiar handwriting. A string of numbers, and beneath them, one line. "Start where the truth was first bent." No explanation, no instructions, just enough to tug open the door to secrets he had spent years hinting at, quiet warnings disguised as stories, questions he never answered, the places in our family where appearances had long replaced honesty. I read the letter 3 more times, tracing each loop of his pen. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the numbers down. Something had begun, and this time, they couldn't erase me from it. I ran the numbers through every pattern I could imagine: dates, filing entries, asset valuations. Eventually, the columns aligned in a way that only made sense if you knew why someone would hide certain payments and inflate others, and I did. I powered on my laptop and slipped into the kind of work I had always done best: quiet, methodical, precise. The kind of work no one in the Solis family ever noticed or cared about, even when it saved them. I sifted through archived documents tied to my grandfather's old contracting company. I cross-checked them with public filings that had been sitting untouched for years. The payments told a story long before I put words to it. I mapped the flow of funds that never matched the official timeline. When something didn't align, I color-coded it. When something repeated, I boxed it in red. Hours passed like minutes, no anger, no grief, just clarity. The truth wasn't hiding. It had been sitting in plain view, waiting for someone who wasn't invested in the illusion to actually look. By late afternoon, my notebook was half filled. Patterns emerged. So did motives. A particular sequence of payments, rounded amounts, always just below thresholds that triggered mandatory review, appeared again and again under a shell entity. My father, Gregory, once advised. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. Not surprise. Not even disappointment. Just confirmation of what silence had been whispering for years. I turned to a fresh page and began assembling a timeline. Dates, locations, signatures, inconsistencies. Everything grounded in public record, or the materials my grandfather had tucked away in his study. No accusations, no speculation, only facts arranged cleanly enough that they spoke without interpretation. I didn't need to fight them. The truth could handle that on its own. As the sun dipped behind the Taos Ridge, I reached into the envelope again and pulled out the second item, the brass key. I knew exactly which door it belonged to, the locked cabinet beneath Vincent's desk. The one he always touched before leaving the room, as if checking that something important remained safe. A habit I'd filed away years ago without realizing its meaning. I closed my notebook and slid it into my bag. Then I drove back to the lake house, arriving after twilight. Their cars were still parked in a neat cluster, positioned like pieces on a board waiting for someone to move them. My footsteps softened on the damp planks of the deck as I approached the door. Inside, the house was dim except for a few hallway lights. From the living room came thin, strained laughter, my parents and Selena discussing investment projections, even now hungry for what they believed was theirs. I slipped into the study without being seen. The air inside still carried the faint scent of cedar and old books. The desk lamp cast a soft halo around the cabinet, illuminating the metal lock that had guarded my grandfather's secrets. I knelt, fitted the brass key into the slot, and turned it. Something inside the cabinet shifted, and then it clicked open. It clicked open with a sound that felt final, the soft metallic sigh of something that had been waiting years to be found. Inside were binders thin, labeled only by years, written in Vincent's precise handwriting. A stack of loose notes sat beside them. The pages softened at the edges from handling. A small recording device rested at the bottom, along with a few printed emails whose faded ink suggested age, not irrelevance. And a single envelope addressed to me, sealed with the same careful crease as the first. I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Instead, I lifted the binders out, one by one. Page after page confirmed what my analysis had already shown. My parents' fingerprints on decisions that slowly stripped my grandfather of control. Financial, managerial, personal, in ways he never publicly admitted. Rounded payments that made no strategic sense. Notes written in my father's legal phrasing. Recommendations attributed to consultation that led only to losses he absorbed alone. Patterns no one else had bothered to read. I scanned each relevant page and uploaded the digital copies to a cloud folder I created under a new alias, backing them up twice. Professional, clean, unbreakable, even if every device I owned disappeared. That was when I noticed the camera so small it blended into the carved frame of the bookshelf, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. But Vincent had left clues for a reason. His letter had said everything I needed to understand. Truth is only effective when the right people see it. The lake house recorded everything. Their actions, their words, their intent. I stood slowly, letting the realization settle like dust in a silent room. This wasn't revenge. This was administration order, accountability carried out by the system my grandfather had built and placed directly into my hands. I closed the cabinet, locked it, and slipped the brass key back into my pocket. No need to announce anything, not yet. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my mother's voice rise crisp, confident, unbothered. Mara will stay out of this. She never had the mind for complex matters. I paused, unseen, Their voices drifted through the house, Gregory's low hum of agreement, Selena's soft exhale, stretching into the shape of compliance she'd worn her entire life. They were so certain, so secure in their assumptions, unaware that the walls they'd dismissed were finally listening. I turned away, steady and silent. This time I wasn't here to be included. I was here to finish what Vincent started. Morning light stretched across the lake house floor in a thin, cold line when I returned. My parents were already dressed too formal for the hour, too composed for what they still believed they controlled. Selena hovered beside them, twisting her sleeve the way she always did when she sensed a shift she didn't understand. Then came the knock. All three straightened at once, as if bracing for a performance. But it was only Mr. Boone, Vincent's longtime friend, confidant, and the one man my parents never managed to intimidate. He stepped inside quietly, carrying a folder and a small device. He nodded at me first, then at them. No greeting, no pleasantries. My mother's smile tightened. "Is this necessary?" He didn't answer. He placed the folder on the table, pressed a button on the device, and stepped back. A soft click filled the room as an audio file began. Then came my grandfather's voice, steady, unmistakable, recorded in the very study where my parents had spent yesterday tearing through his things. "If this is being heard, it means the conditions have been met." My father shifted, suddenly off balance for the first time since the will reading. My mother's expression stayed rigid, frozen at the edges the way porcelain cracks under pressure. My grandfather continued, his voice steady despite whatever strain time had placed on him. "I trusted the people closest to me to handle my work with integrity. Some did not." My mother inhaled sharply. Gregory's jaw tightened. "So I left instructions," Vincent said, "to ensure the truth would be seen clearly, without debate." A second click sounded. Footage appeared on the device's small screen, grainy but unmistakable. My parents in the study, opening drawers, discarding photos, evaluating items like inventory rather than memories. Their voices carried plainly through the speaker, discussing property value, leverage, entitlement, what could be restructured, what could be quietly moved. My mother stepped forward. "This is taken out of context. We were—" Mr. Boone raised a hand. The room stilled. Another clip followed. This time, records were projected across the small screen. Payments, notes, rounded numbers, the same anomalies I had marked in red in my notebook the night before. My father's initials appeared repeatedly in advisory margins. My mother's signature appeared on memos she had always dismissed as routine paperwork. Gregory exhaled sharply. "Old paperwork, misinterpreted. This doesn't prove any." But the recording shifted again. Vincent's voice returned softer now, edged with the weariness of someone who had spent years pretending not to notice betrayal creeping through the walls of his own home. "Mara, if you're hearing this, you've already seen what they hoped would never be found." My mother's head snapped in my direction. "The will reading was not the end," Vincent continued. "It was the beginning. Everything that comes next relies on what you choose to do with the truth that was buried. And every force says—" Elise's composure cracked. Panic blurred the edges of her eyes. "Mara, stop this. You don't understand how these things work." But I didn't say a word. Mr. Boone opened the folder he'd brought and slid out a set of documents, crisp, official, notarized long before my grandfather died. "These are the final directives," he said. "Your father and mother retain the properties assigned to them. Your sister retains her trust. And Sheenis." Selena's shoulders loosened in momentary relief, until Boone spoke again. "But the remainder of the estate," he continued, "including the controlling interest in your grandfather's research foundation, transfers to Mara Solis alone." My father surged to his feet. "Absolutely not. This can be contested. It can." "It can," Boone said calmly. "But if contested, every asset defaults to the foundation in full." That was Vincent's stipulation. Gregory froze. Boone added, "There is also a clause regarding potential legal review of past advisory work. I believe you know which work he meant." Silence blanketed the room. Elise's breath hitched. Selena stared at the floor, cheeks pale. I stepped forward not to speak, but to place the brass key from the locked cabinet onto the table. A small sound, barely audible, yet my mother flinched as if it were a gavel falling. Boone met my eyes. All that's left is acknowledgement. I nodded once. No anger, no triumph, just the clean click of something finally, irrevocably falling into place. My parents said nothing. Not because they agreed with the directives, but because for the first time they understood there was nothing left to argue. The foundation was no longer theirs. The narrative they had crafted no longer held. Behind them, through the study window, the lake remained unnervingly still. The dock didn't creak. No wind pressed against the glass. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. The reversal wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. After they left, my father stiff, my mother silent, Selina pale and shaken, I stayed behind, letting the lake house slowly settle back into its natural quiet. The air still carried the faint scent of cedar and old paper, a mix that had always meant safety to me, long before I understood why. My grandfather's presence lingered in the room, untouched by the storm that had just passed through. I stood by his desk, resting my fingertips along the worn edge, the same place he used to tap when he was thinking. Now it felt like a threshold I had finally stepped over, a line between the child they dismissed and the woman he had quietly prepared. Outside, the water barely moved. A thin mist drifted above the surface, rising and dissolving with each slow breath of the early morning air. I opened the door and walked toward the dock. The boards were cool beneath my feet, the same boards I had sat on as a child when I sought answers I didn't yet have words for. Back then, Grandpa would gesture toward the quiet surface of the lake and say, "Still water tells the truth if you know how to listen." So I listened. No echoes of my mother's cutting certainty. No sharp corrections from my father. No tense, apologetic smiles from Selina. Just the soft lap of the water against the wood and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. Something that felt like my first steady breath in years. I didn't replay what had happened inside. I didn't wonder whether they felt guilt or loss or fear. Their reactions were no longer mine to carry. The documents, the recordings, the truth, those had done their work. What remained now belonged entirely to me. The sun pushed through a narrow break in the clouds and stretched a thin, golden stripe across the water. I watched it move toward me, unhurried and warm, patient as an invitation. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I sat on the edge of the dock and let my feet hover just above the cold surface. The air brushed against my skin lightly, almost gently, as if the lake itself recognized something in me had shifted. For the first time, I felt the beginning not of justice, but of freedom. In the end, it wasn't the documents or the recordings that changed everything. It was the silence that followed, the kind that settles only when truth is no longer questioned. Some endings arrive quietly, some freedoms too. I stepped back from the dock knowing, finally, that the quiet belonged to me. I want to speak directly to you now. If my story struck something familiar, a moment of being overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice reminds people like me that quiet strength isn't weakness. If you've ever carried truths alone or rebuilt yourself from silence, tell me what helped you rise. And if you're still finding your footing, let this be your reminder. You deserve spaces where you're seen, valued, and heard. Support the ones who stand alone. Celebrate your own courage. And never apologize for choosing peace over approval.